writing this at an age I never expected to reach. Most of the men who were with me did not get that chance. For decades, I told myself I would take this to my grave. That it was better left buried with the war, filed away under reports and casualty lists and explanations that were easier for everyone to accept. But time has a way of wearing those excuses thin. And lately, sleep has become harder than it ever was in the jungle. The nightmares never stopped. They only changed shape. Some nights I wake up convinced I can still smell it. Rot and damp earth and something animal. Something wrong. Other nights, it's the silence that returns. That sudden, unnatural quiet where even insects seemed to hold their breath. My doctors called it old age, then stress. Then they settled on what they always used during the war: exhaustion, combat fatigue, a mind overwhelmed by heat, fear, and loss. That is what the official history says as well. But official history never told this part. I was a soldier in the Imperial Japanese Army, stationed in the Solomon Islands during the early years of the Pacific Campaign. We were told we were defending territory. We were told we were preparing for an American advance. We were told many things, most of them simple, most of them familiar to any man who has ever worn a uniform. What we were not told was that the island itself was not empty. I am not writing this for sympathy, and I am not writing it to convince anyone. I know how this sounds. I knew even then how it would sound if it were ever written down. That is why it wasn't. Men who spoke too openly were dismissed, reassigned, or quietly removed from duty. It was easier to say we were confused, easier to blame the jungle, easier to blame ourselves. But confusion does not leave marks like the ones we found. And exhaustion does not explain what followed us through that forest. I have lived a full life since the war. I married, I worked. I raised children who know me only as an old man who sometimes wakes up shouting in the night. I never told them why. Some things are not meant to be passed down lightly. But before I die, I need this written somewhere. Not as legend, not as rumor, as testimony. Because what happened on that island was real. And it was hidden. They said it was exhaustion. They were wrong. We arrived on Guadalcanal in the spring of 1942. The exact date has blurred with time, but the orders were clear enough. Our unit was part of an advance occupation force sent to secure the island and prepare it for future operations. We were not there to fight. Not yet. Our assignment was construction. We were told to build airstrips, reinforce beaches, establish supply routes, and prepare defensive positions in case the Americans decided to challenge us for control of the Solomon Islands. Intelligence reports described the island as strategically valuable but lightly defended. No enemy forces, no resistance, just jungle, heat, and time. It was meant to be routine. From the moment we disembarked, the climate made itself known. The heat was constant, crushing, unlike anything I had experienced in Manchuria or China. Humidity soaked into everything. Uniforms never dried. Boots rotted from the inside out. Metal rusted within days. The air itself felt heavy, as if it pressed down on your chest and made breathing an effort. The jungle surrounded us immediately. Thick walls of green that seemed to close in as soon as you turned your back. Vines choked the ground. Trees rose straight up into a canopy so dense that daylight filtered through in patches, leaving everything beneath in a permanent half-shadow. Insects were everywhere. Mosquitoes, flies, things without names. They crawled into food, clothing, wounds. Disease spread quickly. We accepted it as part of island warfare. We were soldiers. We adapted. The local islanders kept their distance. They lived along the coast in small villages, watching us from afar as we worked. They rarely approached the construction sites and never volunteered to guide us inland. When they did speak, it was through interpreters, and even then, the conversations were brief, polite, careful. There was fear in them, not fear of us, but of the jungle behind us. One of our interpreters, a man who had spent years studying local dialects, mentioned it casually at first. The islanders believed the interior was dangerous, not because of animals or disease or spirits in the abstract sense. They spoke of things that lived there, creatures that hunted in the mountains and caves. Giants, they said, man-eaters. He told it like a curiosity, the way anthropologists discuss folklore. Every culture has its warnings, stories meant to keep children close to home, stories shaped by generations of fear and imagination. We laughed. Someone joked that perhaps the giants were afraid of Japanese soldiers. Another said if they were real, we'd put them to work carrying supplies. Even the interpreter smiled, though he didn't laugh as loudly as the rest of us. At night, the locals stayed near their fires by the beach. They did not venture inland after dark, not for any reason. We noticed that, but we didn't question it. From a military perspective, there was nothing threatening about Guadalcanal at that stage. No enemy presence, no combat patrols, no artillery fire, just construction schedules and guard rotations. The jungle was unpleasant, but it was not hostile. Or so we believed. The legends were dismissed as superstition, stories told by people who didn't understand modern war. None of us believed them, not yet. The war reached us on the morning of August 7th, 1942. We woke to the sound of naval gunfire rolling across the water and the distant thunder of explosions along the coast. American ships filled the horizon more than we had expected, more than we had prepared for. Their landing was fast and overwhelming. Marines came ashore in numbers that made it clear our position near the beaches would not hold. Orders came quickly. Fall back, abandon the coastal installations, move inland. The plan was not to meet them head-on. We were to regroup in the interior, harass supply lines, gather intelligence, and slow the American advance through guerrilla operations. It was a strategy we understood well. The jungle would be our ally. It would hide us, protect us, wear the enemy down. At least that was the theory. Our unit was reassigned to deep interior patrols, small groups moving through terrain that had never been properly mapped, areas the islanders avoided, areas we had barely noticed before the war forced us into them. We traveled light, rifles, rations, radios that worked only when the canopy allowed it. No roads, no landmarks, just green walls and narrow paths cut by men who didn't know what lay ahead. Within hours, the jungle swallowed us. Sunlight faded into a constant twilight beneath the trees. The air grew heavier, the sounds more distorted. Every step sank into mud or tangled roots. Progress was slow, exhausting. You could march all day and still feel like you hadn't gone anywhere. The first few days followed a routine. Establish temporary camps, observe American movements from a distance, send short radio reports when we could. The Americans were consolidating around the airfield, bringing in supplies, building defenses. Standard procedure. Nothing unusual. But something changed once we moved deeper. It started as a feeling, subtle enough to ignore at first. The sense that we were no longer alone. Not in the way soldiers are usually watched by the enemy. This was different. There were no patrols, no voices, no gunfire. Just the impression of presence. as if the jungle itself had become aware of us. Men began to mention it quietly, that they felt eyes on them when they stopped, that the undergrowth seemed to shift just beyond sight. The lieutenant dismissed it as nerves. Long marches, poor sleep, constant tension, perfect conditions for imagination to take hold. Then we began to see the tracks. They appeared in patches of soft earth along riverbanks and in clearings where the canopy opened. Footprints, humanoid in shape, but far too large, longer than any man's boot, pressed deep into the ground as if whatever made them carried tremendous weight. The lieutenant suggested they were old, weathered impressions left by erosion or animals. Someone else joked that maybe the giants were real after all. No one laughed very hard. We were miles from any American position. The tracks did not follow our patrol routes. They crossed them, as if something had been moving through the jungle long before we arrived, and continued to do so without concern for us. That unease followed us for days, growing heavier with every step inland. And then it stopped being theoretical. That's when we found the first body. The body did not belong to anyone in our unit. That was the first thing we noticed. He was a scout from another patrol, operating somewhere in the same sector. We recognized the uniform, the equipment, the markings on his back. His rifle was still in his hands, fingers locked tight around the stock, 3 rounds missing from the magazine. He had fired before he died. The damage to his body did not match anything we had seen in combat. There were no bullet wounds, no shrapnel, no signs of an explosion. What we saw instead was raw force, limbs pulled from their sockets, bones crushed inward. The chest collapsed as if something massive had pressed down with deliberate strength. There were bite marks, not shallow, not torn flesh, the way animals usually leave it. These were deep, wide impressions, spaced too far apart to belong to any human mouth. The skin around them was torn and bruised, the tissue beneath damaged beyond recognition. The sergeant knelt beside the body and said nothing for a long time. "Animal," he finally said. His voice was steady, but there was hesitation in it. "Large predator." The lieutenant agreed quickly. It was the only explanation that fit within the rules we understood. Crocodile, perhaps. Some kind of wild animal driven by hunger or desperation. The jungle was full of things we didn't know, but crocodiles don't carry men into trees. We noticed that when we began to look around. There was blood above us. Dark streaks on the branches, smeared along the bark at a height well above our heads. Whatever had killed him had done so off the ground. 15 feet up, maybe more. The branches were bent and broken under weight. No one spoke. We buried him where we found him. There was no time to do more. We marked the location and moved on, because that was what soldiers did. One death, no matter how disturbing, did not change orders. Men died in war every day, sometimes without explanation. The second body came 3 days later. This one was from our own unit. He had been on night watch, positioned along the perimeter, alert, experienced. The scream woke us all at once, sharp and sudden, then cut off so abruptly it felt like someone had reached into the darkness and switched it off. By the time we reached him, he was already dead. He had been dragged more than 100 meters into the jungle. The damage was the same: crushed bones, torn flesh, bite marks. But there was something else this time. The trees nearby were marked. 4 long gouges carved into the trunk of a hardwood tree, running straight down from a height far above our reach. The bark had been stripped away, the wood beneath exposed. Whatever made those marks had done so effortlessly, One of the younger soldiers whispered that we needed to leave, that this wasn't an enemy we could fight. The sergeant snapped at him to keep quiet, but his hands were shaking as he reloaded his rifle. No one said the word that had been circling our thoughts since the tracks first appeared. No one mentioned the islanders' stories. No one wanted to be the first to give shape to the fear. But it was there now, and whatever did this wasn't afraid of us. We doubled the night watch after the second death. 4 men on guard at all times. Rifles loaded, perimeters tightened, fires kept low and positioned behind us so our eyes could adjust to the darkness beyond the light. The sergeant gave the orders quietly, without explanation. None was needed. The jungle did not feel the same that night. At first, everything sounded normal. Insects chirping, leaves rustling, small animals moving through the undergrowth. Familiar noise that usually made sleep possible. Then slowly, those sounds began to fade. Not all at once, one by one. The insects stopped first, then the birds. Even the distant movement of animals disappeared. Within minutes, the jungle went completely silent. No wind, no calls, nothing. In that silence, you become aware of your own breathing. The scrape of a boot against dirt sounds like a shout. Every instinct tells you something is wrong. The sergeant whispered for us to ready our weapons. That was when the smell reached us. It rolled in from the trees like a physical thing, thick and overwhelming. Rot, wet fur, decay. The stench of old blood left too long in heat. It burned the back of my throat and made my eyes water. Men gagged, covering their mouths to keep from making noise. Then we heard it, a low rumbling sound that vibrated in the chest more than the ears. Not quite a growl, not quite a roar. Something deeper, layered, as if more than one tone existed at once. It moved through the jungle slowly, circling our position. Branches snapped, vegetation crushed under heavy weight. Whatever it was large. Someone pointed toward the tree line, his hand shaking. I followed his gaze just as something stepped into a thin shaft of moonlight between the trees. I saw it clearly for only a moment. It stood upright, taller than any man I had ever seen. The body was broad and heavily muscled, covered in matted hair that hung in clumps. The arms were too long, reaching far past where a man's knees would be. Its head sat low on thick shoulders, the face set deep beneath a heavy brow. Its eyes reflected the moonlight, dull and unnatural. In one hand, it held a crude stone club, shaped by intention, not accident. Then it moved. The sound it made when it charged tore through the silence like thunder. The sergeant shouted for us to fire, and we did. Rifles cracked, muzzle flashes lighting the jungle in sharp bursts. I saw bullets strike its body. I saw the impacts. It did not slow down. It hit our camp with the force of a landslide. The club came down once, and a man simply disappeared beneath it. Another was lifted off the ground, as if he weighed nothing at all. His scream lasted seconds before it stopped. There was no formation after that, no commands that mattered. Men fired and ran at the same time, shouting, stumbling, colliding with each other in the dark. Training dissolved into panic. The sergeant screamed for us to fall back into the jungle, away from the camp. We ran blindly, branches tearing at our faces, roots grabbing at our feet. Behind us, the sounds were unbearable, screaming, bone-breaking, that rumbling roar echoing again and again. We did not stop until the sergeant forced us to. 8 men answered when we counted heads. We had been 12 when the night began. No one spoke for a long time. Whatever we had encountered was not an animal driven by hunger. It had not struck from hiding and fled. It had approached deliberately, observed us, tested our response. It wasn't hunting, it was testing us. We did not return to the camp. The sergeant made that decision immediately, without discussion. Whatever had attacked us knew where we slept, knew our patterns. Staying meant waiting to be finished. We moved deeper into the jungle instead. No lights, no talking, hand signals only. The sergeant set strict rules as we went. No breaking branches unless absolutely necessary. No coughing, no swearing when you fell. Sound carried differently out here, and we had already learned what listened for it. We traveled at night and rested during the day, hiding beneath thick canopy or rocky outcroppings where the jungle thinned. The darkness was terrifying, but it was also our only cover. During daylight, visibility worked both ways. Every man walked with his rifle raised, fingers on triggers, eyes constantly moving. We no longer thought in terms of patrol routes or objectives. Everything narrowed to survival and distance. Put ground between us and that place. Keep moving. The smell came back before dawn, faint at first, just enough to make you question yourself, then stronger, the same rot and decay we'd smelled the night of the attack. It drifted through the trees behind us, lingering, never quite fading. No one needed to say what it meant. We picked up the pace. The jungle punished speed. Roots caught boots. Mud sucked at your legs. Vines tore at exposed skin. Sweat soaked everything. Breathing became loud, no matter how hard you tried to control it. Somewhere behind us, something moved. We couldn't see it. We didn't hear it clearly, but the jungle reacted. Birds burst from branches ahead of us. Small animals scattered across our path. Whatever followed us was not trying to be quiet anymore. It didn't need to be. The sergeant signaled for a direction change, guiding us toward higher ground. Ridges and rock slowed pursuit, or so we hoped. We climbed hard, scrambling over wet stone and loose soil, using hands as much as feet. That was when we lost another man. He was behind me in the line. I heard him slip, heard the sudden intake of breath as he fell. Before anyone could turn back, there was a sound from the darkness to our left. A rush of movement, fast and heavy. His scream cut off almost immediately. The sergeant ordered us forward without stopping. No one argued. Looking back would have changed nothing. The jungle swallowed the sound, and then there were 7 of us left. We climbed until our legs shook and our lungs burned. At the top of the ridge, the sergeant finally called a halt. We collapsed behind rocks and low brush, trying to steady our breathing. Below us, the jungle shifted. We heard it moving there, circling the base of the ridge, branches breaking, stone scraping. That low sound again, rolling through the trees. It was close enough now that we could feel it in our chests. But it did not climb. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if learning the terrain, as if memorizing our position. After a long time, the sounds faded back into the forest. None of us slept. When dawn came, pale light filtered through the canopy, revealing a jungle that looked almost peaceful. Green, still, empty. If you hadn't lived through the night, you might have believed it harmless. We moved again as soon as we could, staying on high ground, never stopping for long. The smell lingered behind us, sometimes stronger, sometimes weaker, but never gone. It wasn't chasing blindly, it was tracking, and by then, we all understood the same terrible truth. We knew it was following us. By the second day of moving south, the terrain began to change. The jungle thinned in places, opening into stretches of higher ground where we could see further ahead. Paths became clearer, cut not just by animals, but by men. American patrol routes, fresh enough to recognize. We avoided them when we could. An encounter with the enemy was the last thing we needed. Our ammunition was limited, our strength nearly gone. Any firefight would draw attention we could not survive. Then we found the first sign, an abandoned camp. American issue gear lay scattered across a small clearing. Packs torn open, rifles missing. The ground churned up as if something heavy had moved through it repeatedly. There were no bodies, just blood. Too much blood to explain with a skirmish. The sergeant crouched beside one of the packs and examined it carefully. "They didn't retreat," he said quietly. "They were taken." Further along, we found another site. This one worse. A defensive position hastily constructed and violently destroyed. Sandbags ripped apart. A machine gun bent beyond use, twisted as if it had been struck by enormous force. Deep gouges marked the trees nearby, the same marks we had seen before. No signs of Japanese weapons, no shell casings, no indication of a firefight between men. Whatever had done this had moved through the camp unchecked. Later that day, we heard voices ahead, American voices. We dropped low and watched from cover as a small patrol passed through open ground below us. 6 men, tired, alert. One of them was talking as they walked. "Johnson's squad never made it back," he said. "Command thinks it was a Japanese ambush." Another shook his head. "Didn't look like any ambush I've seen. Camp was torn apart, like something went through it." They moved on, unaware of us, unaware of how close they were to the truth. We stayed hidden until they were gone. No one spoke for a long time afterward. The realization settled in slowly, heavier than fear. This was not an isolated incident, not a single patrol unlucky enough to stumble into the wrong place. Men on both sides were disappearing. Bases were being destroyed without gunfire. Explanations were being written that did not fit the evidence. The creature did not recognize uniforms. It did not care about flags, languages, or empires. We were all intruders. The war we thought we were fighting existed only on the coast, on maps, in reports. Out here, in the interior, there was a different reality. One older and far more dangerous. We had invaded something else's territory. That was when I finally understood something that should have been obvious from the beginning. This wasn't our war. We reached the garrison shortly before nightfall. It was a fortified position near the Lunga River, manned by over 100 troops. Trenches, sandbag emplacements, machine gun nests covering every approach. To anyone looking at it on a map, it was secure, defensible, safe. The sergeant reported immediately. He spoke calmly and precisely, the way professionals do when they want to be taken seriously. He described the bodies, the tracks, the attack on our camp, the pursuit through the interior. He did not use dramatic language. He did not speculate. The commanding officer listened without interrupting. When the report ended, he dismissed it. Exhaustion, jungle fever, combat stress. He told us to get medical attention and rest. There was an American offensive underway, and he could not afford panic spreading through the ranks. Whatever we thought we had seen would be dealt with after the war. We were sent to the medical tents. The attack began at Oro 200 hours. I was awake when the sound reached us, that same low rumbling vibration rolling through the night like distant thunder, then screaming, not one voice, many, the sound of men waking suddenly to terror. Gunfire erupted along the perimeter. I grabbed my rifle and ran toward the noise. The camp was chaos. Searchlights snapped on, sweeping the tree line. Officers shouted orders that overlapped and conflicted. Men fired into the darkness, unsure of what they were aiming at. Then the lights caught it. The creature stepped into view, just beyond the outer defenses. Taller than it had seemed before, its body matted with blood and mud. In its hands, the same crude stone club, now darkened with fresh stains. Machine guns opened up immediately, tracer rounds stitched across its torso. I saw the impacts. I saw dark fluid spray from the wounds. It staggered for a moment, then straightened and charged. The defensive line collapsed almost instantly. Sandbags were smashed aside, wooden barriers shattered. A machine gun nest disappeared beneath a single blow. Men were crushed into the ground where they stood. Others were lifted screaming and carried away into the darkness. The creature moved with purpose. It did not strike randomly. It went for the heaviest weapons first, then the command positions, then the soldiers trying to regroup. It was dismantling the garrison, piece by piece. Artillery was brought to bear. Shells exploded along the perimeter, lighting the night in flashes of white and orange. One struck close enough to knock the creature off its feet. For a moment, we thought that might be enough. It rose again, slower, pleading, but still moving. Then it stopped in the open, directly under the lights, and did something none of us will ever forget. It began to feed, right there, in the middle of the base, as if it wanted us to see, as if denial itself had become irrelevant. Men broke and ran, orders no longer mattered. The perimeter was gone, fire spread through tents, and supply dumps. Ammunition cooked off in sharp cracks. Everywhere there was noise, movement, panic. The sergeant found me near a collapsed trench. His face was gray, streaked with blood that was not his own. "We're leaving," he said. "Now." We ran. Behind us, the sounds of destruction continued, screaming, metal tearing, that rumbling roar echoing through the night as the creature moved freely through the camp. We didn't stop until the jungle thinned and the base was nothing but fire behind us. At dawn, from a ridge overlooking the ruins, we could see what remained. An entire garrison reduced to wreckage in less than an hour. The creature was gone. The damage was not. One creature destroyed an entire base. We reached the main defensive line the following afternoon. It was a much larger installation. Several hundred troops dug in along prepared positions. Artillery emplacements, reinforced bunkers, a command structure that still believed it controlled the situation. The perimeter guards stopped us immediately, weapons raised, demanding identification. We must have looked unrecognizable, mud-caked, blood-streaked, hollow-eyed, men who had walked out of something they could not explain. When we told them where we had come from, they didn't believe us. When we told them what had happened, they almost had us detained. Then the colonel arrived. He was an older officer, experienced, with the posture of someone who had survived more than one campaign. He studied us in silence for a long moment before speaking. "Tell me everything," he said. The sergeant gave the report again, more detailed this time. Locations, times, descriptions of the bodies, the tracks, the attacks. The lieutenant added his observations. I and the other survivors filled in what we could. There were no embellishments, no theories, just facts. The colonel listened without interruption. When we finished, he turned to his map and spread it across the table. He asked us to mark where we had first encountered the tracks, where the bodies were found, where the garrison had been destroyed. As the marks accumulated, a pattern emerged. They were concentrated in the mountainous interior, the densest jungle, areas no one had properly explored, areas the locals avoided without exception. "The islanders warned us," the colonel said quietly. We chose not to listen. He told us the Americans had been reporting similar incidents: missing patrols, camps destroyed without signs of combat, bodies recovered in ways that defied explanation. Each side assumed the other was responsible. Both were wrong. "This isn't a weapon," the colonel continued. "It's not an enemy force in the conventional sense. It's territorial." The words settled over the room like a weight. We weren't facing something that wanted to conquer or pursue us beyond its domain. We had crossed into a space that belonged to something else. We had built roads and bases and airstrips where we were not meant to be. The colonel issued new orders immediately. No night movement, no small patrols. Defensive positions reinforced, the interior to be avoided whenever possible. Heavy weapons repositioned to cover jungle approaches. It was all logical, and it was far too late. That night, as we stood watch behind layers of sandbags and searchlights, the jungle beyond the perimeter remained dark and silent. Somewhere out there, something watched and waited, unmoved by our preparations. For the first time, someone in authority understood what we were dealing with. And for the first time, the truth was spoken aloud. We weren't defending land. We were trespassing. The attack came 3 nights later. We had done everything we could in the time we were given. The colonel reinforced the perimeter, doubled the guards, positioned heavy machine guns at every approach. Artillery was pre-sighted into the jungle beyond the wire. Searchlights swept continuously, cutting through the darkness in slow, methodical arcs. 300 men stood ready. We believed numbers would matter. The first warning was not sound, but smell. It drifted in low and heavy, the same rot and decay we had learned to fear. Men along the perimeter stiffened as it reached them. Orders were whispered down the line, weapons raised, fingers tightened on triggers. Then the jungle went silent. Every insect, every bird, every living thing stopped at once. The darkness felt deeper for it, as if the night itself had drawn closer. The sergeant stood beside me in the trench. "They're here," he said quietly. He was right. They emerged from the tree line without rushing, without noise, beyond the crushing of vegetation beneath their weight. Not one, not two, dozens. Shapes moving in coordinated lines, spreading along the entire perimeter. Tall, broad, upright figures carrying crude stone weapons, their movements deliberate and purposeful. This was not an ambush. This was an assault. The colonel shouted the order to open fire, and the night exploded. Every weapon we had engaged at once: rifles, machine guns, artillery firing directly into the jungle. Tracer rounds lit the darkness in red and white arcs. Explosions tore through the trees, sending debris into the air. I saw bullets strike their bodies. I saw impacts that would have dropped any man. Some of the creatures fell, crashing into the earth and not rising again. But most of them kept coming. They absorbed fire in a way that defied understanding, wounded, bleeding, but relentless. Their roars cut through the gunfire, deep and layered, echoing across the camp. The first breach came on the eastern side. A giant smashed through the sandbag line as if it weren't there. The machine gun nest behind it vanished under a single blow. Men scattered, firing as they ran. Another creature followed through the gap. Then another. The perimeter began to fold inward. Defensive positions were overrun one by one. Artillery crews were crushed before they could reposition. Officers tried to rally men into secondary lines, but the giants moved faster than command could adapt. They targeted strong points, supply depots, command tents. They knew what to destroy. This wasn't hunting. This was war. I found myself moving with the sergeant and a handful of others, falling back through smoke and fire. Tents burned around us. Ammunition detonated in sharp cracks. The ground shook under heavy impacts. A giant appeared ahead, blocking our path. We fired together, emptying magazines into its torso. It staggered, roared, then raised its club. A grenade exploded near its feet, tearing into its legs. It fell hard, shaking the earth. We didn't wait to see if it would rise again. The colonel ordered a general retreat. There was no coordination left to save. Men broke for the coast in small groups, abandoning positions that no longer existed. The giants pursued for a time, but not with urgency. They had achieved their objective. They were driving us out. By the time we reached the open ground near the beach, dawn was beginning to lighten the sky. Exhausted men collapsed in the sand, staring back at the jungle they had fled. At the edge of the trees, the giants stopped. They did not follow us onto the beach. They did not need to. They stood at the tree line, massive silhouettes against the fading darkness, watching us leave. The message was unmistakable. They stopped at the tree line. We didn't belong beyond it. The official reports never mentioned any of it. According to the records, our losses on Guadalcanal were the result of enemy action, disease, and logistical failure. Positions were said to have fallen under pressure from American forces. Patrols were listed as missing in action. Garrison destruction was attributed to conventional combat and poor coordination. It was cleaner that way. Men who spoke too openly were reassigned or quietly dismissed. Others stopped talking altogether. There was no place in a military report for something that did not fit doctrine, no category for enemies that could not be named. It was easier to say we were exhausted, easier to say the jungle broke us. Those of us who survived carried it anyway. Some drank, some isolated themselves, some woke screaming in the night, haunted by sounds and smells no one else could understand. We all shared the same memory. The moment when we realized the war we were fighting was not the only one being fought on that island. The interior of Guadalcanal was never fully occupied after that. Bases stayed close to the coast. Patrols avoided the mountains. Roads were built where visibility was clear and escape possible. Officially, it was a matter of efficiency and supply. Unofficially, everyone knew why the jungle remained untouched. The Americans learned the same lesson we did. The locals never changed their behavior. They stayed near the beaches. They avoided the interior. They passed their stories down without embellishment, without fear of sounding foolish. To them, the giants were never myths. They were neighbors. I survived the war. I returned home. I built a life that looked ordinary from the outside. But some nights, even now, I wake up convinced I can hear that sound again. That deep, rolling call echoing through trees that never end. I know better than to dismiss it. Time does not erase territory. It does not change what belongs where. The creatures we encountered had lived on that island long before we arrived, and there is no reason to believe they ever left. The jungle is still there, the mountains are still unexplored, and the stories are still told quietly by people who have learned to listen. I am writing this not to frighten anyone, but to leave a warning behind. Legends are not always born from imagination. Sometimes they are memories passed down carefully, shaped by survival. We ignored those warnings. We paid for it. Some places were never meant to be conquered. Guadalcanal was one of them.